Chances are, if you're here, you're looking for a better way to sell. Well, this is Pete Monfre, and I'm going to show you a better way to sell. In part one, you remember, we showed how in the traditional sales process, generally we're reactive to the buyer. In other words, we're not in control of the process. Let me show you an optimized process where you're firmly in control. It's a step-by-step process that you would engage with a prospect who's met certain basic qualifications. Let's say that it's your first meeting with them. Maybe you've talked to them on the phone, they'd agreed to a meeting, so there's some level of interest there. You don't really know much more about that at this point, and this is the meeting that you want to find out if they're for real, right? And if they're going to be a good match, which is everything. And so the first step is to establish rapport, right? We want to make sure that these are people that we want to work with. And if they're not, we need to be courageous enough to say, you know, I don't think, Mr. Prospect, that we're a match, so that we can spend our time on yeses, right? So we know we're going to burn through 80 or 90% of no's before we get to some yeses. And we want to do that as quickly as possible and hopefully learn right away. So the next part is crucial. We want to set the agenda, right? Because the person who sets the agenda controls the meeting, right? And usually in a sales call, nobody really sets a clear agenda, right? And so it's a great opportunity for you to set the agenda that we're going to do X, Y, and then at the end of this meeting, we're going to do Z or A or whatever, right? But you're setting the agenda. Very, very important. Now, if they don't want to agree to that agenda, then again, politely excuse yourself, get on to the next prospect. Then we're going to start digging for pain. We want to ask pain questions. Most people know this, right? If they, I think where they go wrong is they find some surface level pain. You'll see that I have surface level, business level, and personal level. And so there's these deeper levels of pain. A lot of us will stop at the top, this superficial level of pain, and we'll move on in our process. Like, yeah, we got a good one. Again, hope and believe, right? But instead, we really want to make sure that they have pain. We want to understand how it affects them personally. And if they don't have pain, then again, we're out. You see the little arrow going, process ends, we move on to the next one. Are you starting to see how your sales cycle is getting shorter? So we're looking for pain, and then we move into the next phase. Once we understand what their pain is, we can move into the budget phase. And here's the key. You want to relate that budget, and you want to correlate that to the pain. Mr. Prospect, you told me that this isn't working for you, and you've got this problem. How much is that costing you? How much would you say that's costing you? If they don't have the budget, not willing to share it with you, in other words, they want you to guess, shoot in the dark, you know, hey, guess my budget. Terrible game show. Don't play it. Out. No pain, no pain, no budget. We're done. We're not a match. Thank you. Appreciate your time, Mr. Prospect, but we're just not a match. Next step, decision process. Now, I say decision process, right? This is another one of those questions if you ask a prospect, well, who's the decision maker? Are you the decision maker? Of course they're going to say yes. Remember, buyers are liars. Maybe they are, maybe they're not. You need to ask better questions so that you can really get down to the bottom of how do they buy these kinds of services? What does that process look like, right? This is where you can head off the problem that later on, after you've done all this work, the hidden decision maker comes out that you've never talked to. You have no idea what they really want. You don't even know if they're bought into the thing at all, right? And that derails more sales processes than I can describe. And so really understanding that decision process is going to save you a lot of heartache later and significantly shorten your sales process. So if you can't get to if they're not the decision maker, that's not necessarily, a deal killer. If they can't create a path to the decision maker, in other words, they become an advocate and then take you to the next level. If you can't get any of that done, you got to say we're not a match, and you got to be done and move on. We move on. Then there's the proposal. Proposal should contain no new information. This is what I'll typically say if somebody asks me for a proposal. I say, I'm happy to do that for you, no problem. It's not going to contain any new information. It's going to reflect what we talked about here and define how to move forward, right? That's what a proposal is. And then there's this last step that I don't really see in any sales processes except maybe Sandler. It's the post-sell, okay? The post-sell is to bring up an objection that might have come up earlier in the sales process. And you want to bring it up while you're sitting with that prospect in that first meeting. Remember, this is all over the course of about an hour or 2 hours. You're going to find out all this information. And in fact, if you're doing it well, you're going to talk very little. You're going to be listening 80-20. You're going to listen 80% of the time. The questions I ask do the job for me. They establish my credibility, my knowledge. They're good, deep questions. We want to deal with whatever that big objection is while we're there. We don't want it to come up later when they take our proposal onward or whatever they do with it after we're out of the picture. We want to deal with it now, and we want to say things like, Mr. Prospect, if this, you mentioned X, Y, and Z, if that happens, how are we going to deal with that, right? And so post-sell is a great tool that so often just doesn't even happen at all. And so this process is how you control it. And there's a lot of subtleties here, but generally about 1 to 2 hours, you should have all the information you need to decide if that prospect is worth your time. Imagine the impact that would have on your books if you could qualify a prospect in or out definitively within an hour or so. So consider this. A lot less wild goose chases, right? Not chasing around people who were never buyers, who never had the budget, who have hidden decision makers. You're going to lower your cost of sales, obviously, because you're not going to be spending 100 calls following up with somebody who's never going to buy. You're going to find out that in the first hour. It allows fewer people to cover more prospects because you have more time now. You're spending your time with people who are a match instead of trying to force fit matches. And it puts you in control of the sales process, all right? That really helps you make for a happier life because you're in control and you can decide how it's going to work for you. And who you're going to work with and how profitable it's going to be and everything. You can control that. And this makes the process repeatable, measurable, and scalable, okay? So, the old traditional sales process, it goes around and around and it just racks up costs to keep you on that hamster wheel. So the traditional process that's taught by so many is the most grossly inefficient way to sell possible. And inefficient means expensive. Instead, I can show you and your team how to control the sales process from first contact all the way through to the time they close themselves, and to do it honestly, with integrity and authority, and no tricks or moves, none of that stuff.
A always B, B, C closing.
Instead of closing, we let people buy. And we avoid a lot of wild goose chases. We spend our time with people who are seriously qualified buyers. I suggest to you that there's a better, more efficient way to sell that works especially well for people who don't like to sell or even high achievers. If you liked what you heard in this video and you'd like to learn more about how it applies to you or your team, get in touch.